Hey Woo lovers, Lee from straightwoo.com here. Nice to be with you as we approach the full moon in Pisces. And here's a reading around that, this chart, and some of the different things that I see unfolding in this chart and how you may be feeling and the different things that could be arising this weekend as we approach this full moon. First things first is that I am very guilty of getting really annoyed with the astrological community in general, but in specific things too. One of my real bugbears, as many of you will know, is the demonization of the sign Scorpio, which I go long and hard about whenever I can. And then another thing, is just kind of like what I would call lazy typification of different things, like full moon in Pisces equals feelings. And I was getting riled up these days, seeing the internet explode with, full moon in Pisces feelings edicts that were being handed out readily and happily by everybody and their little brother. And I guess it's one of those cases of ask for not whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee, sister, because then the feels came for me. So I stand to be corrected. I've come off my ivory tower, my pedestal or whatever. But I do want to talk about the feelings that are likely to come up at the full moon in Pisces. Pisces is, yes, a sign of feeling, but for multiple different reasons. And I think it's important to put a framework to how and why Pisces feels things, how that differs to certain signs, namely the other water signs, and then also how Pisces' way of being is also in itself in our helpful contrast in mirror to Virgo, its opposite sign. So something that I often think about, all of the water signs, period, whether it's Cancer, Pisces, or Scorpio, are in a sense all about feeling. One of the other great things that I've heard said about water signs is that in essence they're about pain, um, and the processing of pain, which is in fact where most of our emotional energy either gets tied up or goes, or where we find our most articulation of emotional content is when we are approaching pain or coming out of it. It's obviously much easier and smoother to kind of move into moments of joy and then move back out. So some people have said that water signs are concerned with pain. For sure that they all feel things and sense things. They're quite sensate in a way, and they do it differently. Each water sign does it a little bit differently. So to give you a sense, and this is if you've had readings with me or if you've done coursework with me and that kind of thing, you might have already heard these things, but to repeat it for anybody that hasn't had those experiences with me, again, the water signs are Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. There's three of each different element, whether that's fire, air, earth, or water. And in water, we have, again, Cancer, Scorpio, Pisces. Starting with Cancer. Cancer rules both the stomach and the breast, but if we think about most specifically the stomach, that is the gut instinct. It is the seat of the intuition. If you have this way of belief, or indeed if you're into energy work or the idea of chakras and energy work, the navel can be a place where energy enters the system, and where then we have a bodily intuitive response to that stuff that's kind of coming into that way. And indeed, there's many spiritual traditions and ancient mythologies that illustrate stories where we might be connected by cords of energy and things that move out of the navel, out of that very important space. It's also the space of the seat of the will, quite often described in that way. And Cancer can be a very willful sign when it wants to be, when it's emotionally moved to do so. But that's their strength, is the intuition, is to sense and react quite often, to retract if they need to sidestep if they need to, do the little crab walk, or pincer claws back if they need to. And that's how Cancer deals with the kind of psychic, intuitive feeling element of itself. It's very innate to them. Scorpio, very different. Again, I hate problematic descriptions of Scorpio, but Scorpio is more here. It's more third eye. And I think it's very demonstrative of third eye. If anybody's ever done, again, if you're not used to this kind of way of thinking, the third eye chakra is quite often called or described as a psychic chakra that gives us, an extension of the eyes forward that we can have visions, we can see things, that we can experience some kind of clairaudient, clairvoyance, seeing, knowing through this space. And I think it is a good description using this space and connecting it and thinking about this is not to say Scorpio rules this chakra or Cancer rules another one. That's, I'm not conflating chakras with signs. I don't think that makes sense. But rather to say that the way of connecting to emotional psychic energy is different for each sign. And Scorpio, it happens more in this kind of way, that it's quite knowing and distinct and clear. And that same way that if you see something, you cannot unsee it. That is how Scorpio usually feels and connects with that kind of stuff. And this can be a very problematic space because your head is there too, and your little monkey brain is sitting behind the third eye and can plump it up with all kinds of wrong images and impulses, and the wires can get very easily crossed here. And so if anybody's ever been to a psychic, had a psychic reading, intuited or meditated or have visions yourself, those can often be misleading and can be more indicative of where you are at energetically than what is true on some much higher plane level. So when it's working really well, there's a crisp clarity that's like quite ringing and resounding with that kind of work, which is Scorpio. It's very penetrative and clear and black and white. But it does have an edge, and sometimes it gets muddled and stuck into different emotions and things that would muddy up that channel. Pisces doesn't feel it in a specific way or in a specific sense or through a specific, again, sense of the body or even chakra point. It's the idea and the state of boundarylessness. It is the most watery of the water signs in many ways to me, not least of which, if you think about Cancer as a crab and Scorpio as the scorpion, although it can also be the eagle and the phoenix. Fish, the two fish of Pisces, are the only animal that is supposed to live 24/7, and indeed can only live 24/7 in the water. Crabs can go in and out, and they can and will. Scorpions can actually exist with a little bit of water. Fish need, quite obviously, the water. And there's an urgency and a sense of the necessity of living an emotional, fluid, creative, fertile life for most Piscean folks. But for that reason, this boundarylessness, this idea and this way of being synced up with people in a way that is so without boundary, without limit, without distinction between self and other, the feelings are quite sensate and real and experiential, but less articulate. And that's one thing that could be happening always at full moon in Pisces, is the feelings are there, but there's an idea or a sense of it like things swimming and swelling beneath the surface, but perhaps they don't reach this kind of clear, distinct moment where it's like, this is the reason why I'm feeling this way, or bam, that's the impulse that, data in, data out, this is why I'm feeling and emoting this way right now. It's a much more soupy, emotionally soupy field. It is much less articulate. That does not make it less powerful or less meaningful. One of the things that Pisces often gets is the admonishment that it's weak in some way or weak-willed. I don't think that's really true, because anybody that lives resoundingly feeling and experiencing and living emotion is not a weak person. It takes a lot of stamina to move through life in that way, first. Second, I don't think the lack of it is an inarticulate experience of emotions, but that doesn't actually lose anything or give us anything less out of an experience. Quite often in the West, we are very, very hugely invested in the idea of naming the thing, writing it down, getting clear about it. That's why we quite like things more like talk therapy than we do faith healing. We prefer things like astrology even to tarot, because tarot is more nonlinear. We like the idea that like we can grab something out of the air that's problematic, wrangle it down to the ground, name it, corral it. Do you know what I mean? Like put boundaries on it and kind of give it a sense of framework, and then chop it off at the root. There's this sense of accomplishment and achievement that kind of enters into this process. Whereas Pisces talks about something very different as a sign. It is about, you don't need to articulate it. You don't need to know it exactly. You don't need to nail it down. You don't need to write it out. You don't need to journal for months. You don't need to go into talk therapy. You don't need to, whatever it is. It's enough that you're feeling it. There's an instant, extremely admirable quality to Pisces and Pisceans that there is no great fight within or without for the need to say, why do you feel this way? Or what's the justification? Or have you thought about the pros and cons? There's an instant respect and empathy and kindness. There's a great compassion within this sign, but it's enough to just be feeling what you're feeling is quite often the answer and the truth and the path for Pisces. So if you are getting in the feels this weekend, I'd say don't try to name it. Don't try to wrangle it out. Don't, just let it be that it's enough to be feeling whatever it is, whatever's arising. It could be something emotional, like a feeling of uprising emotion. It could just be, again, this intuitive sense of something swelling below, maybe an intuitive impulse bringing your attention in a certain direction. Maybe it's a dynamic within your life or different things going on at home or at work or otherwise. But I think the big thing here that I look at and I think about this chart is that Pisces is relatively inarticulate in some ways, because even this, Pisces is often described as a sign that has a great potential for creative output, artistry. Musicians are here, artists are here, creators are here. And we don't think about it. We appreciate art post facto when it's done in front of us, but it's not, it would be quite useless, right, to sit down with an artist before they created something to say, okay, so how are you going to do it? And exactly what is it going to look like? And what are going to be the steps to thinking about it and planning it and making it work and then finishing it? Because art doesn't happen that way. It happens in an inarticulate, non-linear process that just kind of unfolds on its own. It has its own rhythm, and one need not manage it or watch it too closely or intently to make sure it happens. It has its own thing, its own energy and reason for being and unfolding as it does. Whereas the sign across from it, Virgo, is deeply articulate, is always nailing down, every single iota of footnote to the footnote to the footnote of why something is and how it is going to be, and all the kind of who, what, when, where, why business of things. So Sun in Virgo, Moon in Pisces, that's how we get full moons, when the Sun and the Moon are in opposition to each other. So my first thought is feelings and the uprising of feelings. I feel like there's a steadiness in this chart, however, but I still feel like there will be an inarticulacy or an inarticulate nature to the feelings that are felt at this full moon, or the things that kind of crest upwards within us. There's multiple reasons for that. One is that Mercury is direct again, hooray, but it's only just been direct for about a week, so it's still quite moving a little bit sluggish. And Mercury is once again building to a square to Jupiter. And when Mercury and Jupiter get into square or opposition, Mercury being the mind and communication, Jupiter being, and these are simplifications, but useful ones, Jupiter being a planet that makes things bigger or greater or makes one into many, our thoughts become many. Our thoughts become bigger. There can be aggrandized statements and kind of like loud and proud moments. It could just as easily just be a lot of stuff running through the head, a lot of thoughts, for some people that naturally spills over into kind of a more anxious state, having that much energy packing around. But there's a sense probably still of Mercury, again, the planet ruling communications and correspondence and quite often travel, technology, bits and bobs like this, that it's still moving sluggish. So it's not like plumped up to be at like perfect speed and energy and expression right now. Other things that are really helpful in this chart is that there is a grand Earth trine happening in the background of this chart, underpinning it and supporting it from a very deep place. Again, full moon in Pisces, typically we would think of a natural theme around healing or feelings or compassion, some of the very kind of like touchstone keywords that embody Pisces. And some of that can indeed overspill into too much feelings or getting lost in feelings, or instead of accepting the inarticulate nature of the state of play, getting kind of like overwhelmed by it and feeling like, there's a flood on and we don't know how to cope. At this full moon in Pisces, however, there is this grand Earth trine. And what that means is that across the Earth signs, Virgo, Taurus, and Capricorn, there are planets linking to one another that eventually would make a triangle. Indeed, they are. It's Sun in Virgo, trine Saturn in Capricorn, trine to Uranus in Taurus. And this is interesting because it's like, and the moon is beautifully balanced in this position too, because technically, if you know what it means, you can Google it also. This would be a kite formation between Sun, Moon, Saturn, Uranus. So the moon is an also really excellent relationship to both Saturn and Uranus. And that's kind of like, this is like an archetypal story between Saturn is something old, Uranus is something new. I know, so then I'm like, something borrowed, something blue. I don't know what the something borrowed would be in this chart. For sure, the something blue would be Pisces itself. But there's a sense that there's a grounded effort, a pragmatic, grounded, simplistic, organic something that wants to be expressed, that embodies both something old, which is again Saturn, and something new, which is Uranus. It has discipline of Saturn. It has the innovation of Uranus. It has the natural conservatism and respect for tradition that Saturn, especially Saturn in Capricorn, embodies. But it has this, yes, innovative, I'm repetitive there, but innovative approach that's embodied by Uranus and Taurus. But Uranus and Taurus is not like ripping at full speed to make changes. It's quite an interesting melding between a planet that wants to change at any and all cost and a sign that wants to resist change at any and all cost. So the middle path of these two energies combining is, I think, an organic, plodding, serious movement towards growth and newness. And for sure, if you have planets in the early degrees of the Earth signs, this is a really great lunation for you. The moon is caught between a sextile between Uranus and Saturn. Again, so even there's a really excellent sense here of considering the past and considering the future, considering what is important and what would work and what's serious versus what's exciting and what's new and what could break us open to something new. So there's a lot of good support in this chart for whatever it is you've got going on. And my sense, therefore, is as well is that even if there's feeling and the burgeoning and the impulse and this kind of like Piscean, watery, emotional stuff happening, that you've got this kind of groundedness, this backbone just behind you to see you through this moment in this passage. Other things that are going on. Mars retrograde. So Mars retrograde will end within the next 24 hours, and that's also quite important. For the ancient astrologers, when a planet would be still was incredibly auspicious. And the way planets move through retrograde is that Mars is moving forward, and then it stations retrograde. And what we mean by that is it stations, it appears to be very, very still, and then it moves retrograde backwards. And then it reaches a certain point, and then wham, it stations direct. And then we'll start moving forward again. That's exactly what this kind of retrograde movement is like in theory and in practice. But the station itself is quite auspicious because it's like a planet is just stuck, meandering, almost like it's treading water in a space up in the sky, up in this like celestially treading water, just like holding its own in this one particular patch of sky. So also in the background of this chart, there's Mars there, and Mars has through the retrograde been covering Aquarius and Capricorn. It's now in Capricorn in the very last degrees, about 28 degrees of Capricorn, and it's fully in station. We could say it's basically stationary now as of the full moon, and then it's going to then station direct and start moving forward again. So sometimes full moons can create a peak experience, and indeed planets stationing either retrograde or direct can bring about moments of knowing, which are not always great. Like I'm thinking about Mercury turning direct just about a week ago, and kind of all the different things that came out about Donald Trump and his team and Manafort and Michael Cohen and like all this stuff in one day on August 21st. And I think that's about, again, 24 hours within the Mercury direct station. Mars direct station could also bring about that same kind of knowing or understanding about the Mars retrograde, what it has meant for you, the lessons that you've been unpacking. This is about a 2-month process. I believe it went retrograde June 26th and turns direct August 26th, 27th, depending on your time zone and location in the world. I've written about all these different retrogrades on astrology.com, so you can just, Google astrology.com, Mars retrograde, Mercury retrograde in Leo, and all these things will come up. And you'll be able to see different things based on your rising signs that might be of interest to you to review. But I only mentioned the Mars retrograde in its eventual direct station, which happens very, very soon after this full moon in Pisces, because again, any planet that's just kind of treading water hanging in the sky, to ancient people it was impossible for them not to see it. They were acutely tracking these movements very, very closely. For the keeping of time, for omens, for auspicious kind of phenomenon. So that's just something to keep in mind too. There could be something where it's like messages are coming out from Mercury retrograde, messages are coming out from Mars retrograde, and then wham, full moon, peak experience, depending on how this full moon hits your chart. It would probably be more intense if you were early degrees of Pisces, Virgo, Gemini, Sag. And thereabouts. I mean, probably like 0 degrees to 9-ish of the mutable signs, which again are Pisces, Virgo, Gemini, Sag. The only really sticky wicket in this chart that I'm going to talk about quickly, and actually I'm still doing the Ask Me Anything series about, your astrology questions answered. I'm going to be recording some of those later today in some snippet forms so that the videos are like shorter and easier to get through. And I've had a number of questions come in over aspects like this. So I will be doing this a little bit longer and stronger in a separate video if this really resonates with you. But in the back of this chart, the only sticky wicket again that I see is that Venus in Libra is building to a square with Pluto and Capricorn. And I think it perfects on August 26th, the day of the full moon in Pisces. I think it's always interesting and potent to look at what aspects perfect on a certain day of lunations. So Venus is romance. Venus is the pleasure principle. Venus is a hedonist. She likes things that make her feel good. She likes to connect. She likes to make love. She likes to indulge. There's a finery and a luxuriousness and a pleasant, especially in Libra, which is such a pleasant sign itself, and in fact one of the home signs of Venus. There's, again, it's like Freud's pleasure principle. It's the idea of being driven forward by the things that we find attractive and interesting for us. That is Venus. So Venus is a hedonist, or sybarite, if you prefer, but she likes pleasure. She wants to be pleased and be pleasurable. And again, especially in Libra, Venus in Libra definitely wants to please and be pleased. Pluto, not so pleasing. Not so pleasing at all. And in fact, Pluto often conflates pain with pleasure. And Venus and Pluto, if I was just going to put it, easily, I'd say this is about power struggles in romance. This is about a certain level of underhandedness. It's not Venus Neptune, there's not the same level of deception or betrayal. Venus Neptune would be more like somebody quite purposely, not always, but sometimes quite purposely presents themselves as something they are not. Pluto is like a magnet. He's like an intractable magnetic pull that sucks you in. There's a powerful undertow. That's another thing I'm quite often given to saying about Venus-Pluto contacts. You may have Venus square Pluto or opposite Pluto in your natal chart, and this could be true for you. You could have experienced Venus transits to your Pluto or Pluto transits to your Venus, either way, and these feelings could still be true. Again, and what's live in this chart is a Venus-Pluto square that's perfecting today, tomorrow. Venus kind of wants to connect on the basis of pleasure. Pluto wants to connect on the basis of domination and power and control. One side will lose. And the side that will lose is quite often Venus. She has an edge. She has a snippy edge, and she can be backbiting and gossipy and vain and many other things. There are shadowy sides to Venus. It's not that she's all good and all light. But she's just not up to the snuff of to put up with a planet like Pluto in this kind of serious way. And it also reminds me of, hopefully I'm quoting this right, Immanuel Kant, great philosopher, talks about, I think it's called his humanity principle. He talks about basically the idea that if we are human, if we're going to be humane, I need to treat other humans as an end unto themselves, not just a means to an end. Meaning, I need to use my interactions with another human being as an end to themselves, the reason for me doing things, as a point of arrival for certain actions and ways of being, not just like, I'm dealing with you to get what I want. You're just like a stepping stone on my way that I jump over in order to nab the things that I really want. And this is something that I often always think about Venus Pluto squares, oppositions, again, whether that happens by natal chart or transit, is Pluto will often reach out and attempt to use Venus as a means and not an end. He may be excellent at making Venus think that she's an end, that there is some kind of, Venus can be vain, and Pluto probably feels quite ready to pony up to her vanity in order to get what he wants. But there's gaslighting here, there's manipulation, there's the use of people and money and values that are, at least in Immanuel Kant's view, distorted because we are using potentially people and others not as an end, but as a means to an end. That will be most applicable to you if you have planets and points in your chart in the cardinal signs, Aries, Cancer, Libra, Capricorn, from around 15 degrees to 22, 23. But the Venus-Pluto square there, again, in the same way of the Mars retrograde and in that planet stationing direct, there's just as much likelihood that Venus square Pluto could, with the confluence of a full moon and Pisces, add an extra layer to that dynamic or make it more peak than it would have been normally, simply because full moons just kind of bring things up in a very strong and potent way. And I'm going to leave you with some words from great person, someone I greatly admire, Toni Morrison, something that she's written about water itself that reminds me of this chart, but also is, something that I look at or think about quite often when I'm looking at water signs and thinking about different things with water as an element and in the astrological tradition. She says and has written, all water has a perfect memory and is forever trying to get back home. So that's my final thought. I'll let you lead yourself where you need to with those words, but my sense is even if we are feeling a lot, and a lot of what we're feeling is inarticulate, and there are potent messages being flagged up either by Mercury retrograde, Mars retrograde, or Venus and Pluto squaring, that first we can go back home. Water has a perfect memory, is forever trying to get back home. And the home I think we should try to nestle in at this full moon is these earth signs, this grand earth trine sitting in the back chart, at the back of the chart, like a backbone, holding the rest of everything that's happening. Lots of love, my friends, as always. I'll see you in a couple weeks. Feel free, to ask questions. And of course, if you like this, follow, subscribe, etc. And I will be very grateful. Lots of love. Speak to you guys soon. Bye.